Everything you see here, everything in this society, this isn't by accident. Like, people have died and bled for this. This is a consequence of the ability that you all now, you're the inheritors of the system. And you can fuck it up or you can carry it on.
EIT, Eastern Institute of Technology, is actually based in the lovely Hawke's Bay, Napier. And we provide training post-secondary school, tertiary education, for students in trades. So we do certificate level right up to postgrad, which is what you see here.
I'll tell you a quick story. So 5 years ago, I had a very cush job, a comfy position. I had a job for life. I was a professor at a university in the Pacific Northwest, and I had this thing called continuous employment, which basically meant I couldn't get fired. It didn't pay a lot of money, but it was a pretty good job. Didn't have to work too much. It was kind of, I wouldn't say coasting along because I was still doing research, but I noticed over time that the university in which I worked became increasingly illiberal. And what I mean by that is they became less tolerant of speech issues, less tolerant of anything that questioned whatever the orthodoxy was.
You know, for decades, people have been trying to teach business ethics as like content you can learn. But I think one of the missing elements is that without courage, most of the time people know the difference between right and wrong. It's courage that makes the difference as to whether they actually do it. And obviously that applies to free speech too. You know, they know what they'd like to say, they know what they really think. What stops them from doing that is just a lack of courage to actually do it.
I'm a supporter of free speech myself, but I realized that through the lecture that even though I am a supporter, in some ways I have been holding myself back, especially because it's a new country, I'm not used to everything. So there are areas where I hold back, I don't speak out my mind, not just in public, just in private conversations as well, because I'm not used to the people. So I realized that I've been holding back and then I should speak out more.
I eventually quit my job, after just like crazy harassment, but I realized what my failure was there. So I thought that if I could just model civil discourse and ask reasonable questions like a sane human, that I would be fine and that people would give me explanations. But when I quit, I wrote a letter quitting, and I was actually astonished at how viral it went. It was translated into some crazy number of languages and went all around the world. But the consequences of me quitting was that I abandoned all of those students. I left them to the illiberalism and the inability to correct those ideas. And again, people used the university, my colleagues had used the university not to help people think or to challenge them, but to replicate their moral beliefs. They wanted to create little moral clones.
They are afraid to speak out because they are here under a student visa. They feel Immigration New Zealand has a lot of power over them, and that anything they might say to us would get back to the authorities, and that could heavily impact their ability to stay here, to get a post-study work visa and ultimately get residency. So I think that overarching concern for them limits their ability to speak out and even tell someone like myself areas that might be concerning them and things that we need to do about that.
So I want to paint a little picture. Often in autocracies, people view free speech as being feminine, something that women do. And that's used as a criticism of the government. Let's go around the world. So in Russia, for example, you see military parades and Putin as shirtless, and the way that Sputnik, which is an organ of the media, portrays dissenters, particularly dissenters of the war in Ukraine, as sissies. In India, critics of the Modi government are portrayed as a portmanteau press and prostitutes, prostitutes. There also is a kind of a feminization of speech. In Mexico, you have machismo, but we have something else with Maduro, who is now not in the position he once was. But you have intense criticisms linking masculinity to silence. You can go all around the world. They play into narratives in China of the hand Chinese. One of the things that I love about living, all of those things are correlated to free societies, by the way. In China, for example, my son lived in China for many years. My daughter's adopted from China. When you go to a surgeon, it is not uncommon for you to have to pay the surgeon a little money to do a better job. A very good friend of mine who's from India, and he was telling me about some of the dangerous situations that women are in when they have to walk around at night. In 1995, a book called Trust was written by Francis Fukuyama. He's super famous now, wasn't so much so at the time. But the idea is, and it was later carried on by another guy by the name of Putnam, who wrote a book, Bowling Alone, and then he wrote another article in 2007, I think it was E Pluribus Unum. But Fukuyama lays out this really interesting idea. Many people who come from low trust societies and they go to high trust societies, many of those people don't participate in the norms of democratic institutions in those societies. They don't have speech rights, so they don't correct those speech rights. But the very fact that they come here, and by here I mean the West more broadly, means there must be something here that is more attractive to them. Maybe it's just economics. Maybe they just want to make more money. Maybe it is some kind of cognitive liberty or freedom. They want to be able to speak their mind or speak their piece. But the problem is when people go from low trust societies that have low levels of civic participation to societies that are high trust, that have high levels of civic participation, and they do not participate in those communities, then they replicate everything that was wrong in the communities they left. They replicate all of the bad ideas from which they fled. And then they create societies that are akin to the worst elements of their societies. We see this in Western Europe right now. We see this in Paris. Reed and I were just in Paris a while ago, and this Francois Krauss has an interesting survey from 2005 in November when he talks about how many people want to, and I just reread this fairly recently, how many young Muslims want to replicate some of the norms of their society, like Sharia law, lack of freedom of speech, lack of freedom of the press restrictions on, it's probably very unwise to burn a Quran, but I personally think you should have the right to express yourself in any way you want, including criticisms of religion. So it's the problem that people from low trust societies, when they come to high trust societies, don't engage in high levels of civic participation. And part of the reason is that, what did Viktor Orban call Brussels? Effete vegetarian cyclists. It's the idea that there's a kind of feminization of free speech. But there is no feminization of free speech. That's just a narrative. That's just a story that people tell you. Although in the EU's case, that could likely be true in Brussels' case. But there is no feminization of speech. Not speaking out does not make you tough. It doesn't make you a better person. It means that you're less likely to correct errors. Free peoples have free markets. Free markets are subject to error correction. This is Karl Popper's idea. Democracy is subject to error correction. If there's something in the society you don't like, you can try to vote it down. And if that doesn't work, if you're like, wow, I've tried to vote this down, it doesn't work, then you can run for office. You're totally entitled to run for office. And if you lose, well, then try to run a better campaign. But there are ways to engage that. There are social and civic responsibilities that everybody has. And now that you're in New Zealand, you're expected to participate in that. I'm convinced at this point in my life that while we allow freedom for everyone, and society should, very few people will participate in that. Because it takes an act, you have to not be a coward to do that. You have to risk something.
It was told that when we come from low trust societies to high trust societies, so I don't come from particularly restrictive society, but still because of the cultural differences, I tend to hold myself back. And then I realized if I do hold myself back long enough, I will probably lose my sense of self because I will be conforming to what others think and things that others said. So I thought I should speak up.
Well, they have to get the message. Hopefully this is one way to get the message out to them. But I also think we need a sober analysis of the nature of the problem. There are some people who are just not going to exercise their free speech rights, literally no matter what. I mean, they could just face an injustice and they'll either ignore it or join in with it. But those people, I don't think, those are not the people I was talking to today. I was talking to the fence sitters. I was talking to introduce the basic ideas. And I mean, I hope I succeeded. I don't really know. How old, can I ask how old you are?
55.
Okay, I'm older than you. Do you really care if people are mad at you?
Not much.
No, I don't really care either. I'll tell you what, people being mad at you is probably the best thing that ever happened to you. As long as they're mad at you for the right reasons. If they're mad at you because you were honest and you spoke your mind about something, the Greeks had a word for that. They called it Parrhesia, speaking truth in the face of danger. You know who your friends are. And if they're mad at you for a legitimate reason, you say, oh, well, hey, I screwed up. But we still need the norms and institutions in democratic societies that allow us to criticize. But again, I think it's a disposition. I think that there are a lot of people who will never exercise those norms or exercise those privileges. And the problem with not exercising those privileges is that you will create the very things that you fled. That is undeniable. That is what the literature shows. I think Putnam calls it hunkering down. You just hunker down into group. We see that with voting blocks in the UK now. Voting blocks in the UK are largely along sectarian lines. That is horrifically bad for democracy. They should be around policy positions and ideas. All right. So, anybody want to guess at why you would want free speech? One at a time, please. I can't take all this participation. It's almost too much for me. Anybody? Nobody's getting extra credit today, I can see.
No, you're not being graded.
Anybody? Why would you want to criticize the government, a policy you don't like, a trading practice you don't like, something in the workforce? What would be the point? Okay, let me ask the question this way. What would be the consequence if you weren't allowed to criticize the government?
There's no room for change.
Who said that? Did you say that? Give her extra credit. Yes, that's good. You could clap for her too. That's good. Yeah. There's no room for change. And if there's no room for change, by necessity, you'll stagnate. And if anybody wants a little higher concept here, I would argue this. If you're not willing to change long enough, then by necessity, whatever you're doing will be erroneous. If you do it, you take that out, you extend the time horizon, it has to be an error. So if you can't change, you can't make, for example, better markets. Can you imagine making an AI like ChatGPT that can't change? Then you would be locked into a way of viewing the world that would be false. And then people look at their pocket gods, right? So they think they have the absolute truth from their gods. But they don't. They're just locked into whatever it is because you can't change. Okay, so the consequence of not having free speech would be you'd be locked into systems that can't change. What else? If you can't change, you can't improve. If you can't improve, you can't be economically competitive in an economic sense. What about in a governmental sense? What about in a policy sense? You think Putin surrounds himself with literally anybody who said, geez, we might want to think about this because the war could go on for 3 or 4 years. It could galvanize the Americans and the Europeans. We could lose 700,000 people. We could see our military arsenal utterly devastated. Decimate, by the way, is a Roman word which means 10%. This is way beyond decimation.
Isn't that the situation, it's me.
Yeah, sorry, I'm deaf in this ear. I don't know where anybody's coming from.
You're talking about that example.
Oh, wait a second here.
Isn't that the case of what is happening now in the Gulf War and the response of the government from the European countries? Isn't that, in a way, not exercising free speech?
On whose part?
On the, all the prime minister, for example, prime minister.
Oh, Keir Starmer?
Yes. Well, we got much stronger response later, but before, at the beginning of the war, you didn't have it.
Yeah. So there are two things. One is the consequence of not exercising free speech, and the other one is the lack of the ability to exercise free speech. So in the United States, you can criticize, there are limits of what you can do. You can't slander people. You can't say, hey, I was with this guy and I saw him like molesting 10-year-olds. And you certainly can't do that publicly. There are laws against that. There are also laws against making claims to assassinate the President of the United States. You cannot do that either. So even in the United States, we have restrictions on what one can and cannot say. But there are differences between allowing certain people to openly express their ideas and then people not expressing their ideas. So I'm completely convinced that at this point, I said it before, I'll say it again, whether or not someone will exercise their free speech is a disposition. Certain people are just going to do it and certain people just aren't going to do it. And I don't know if I don't really think there is a way to convince someone to do it. So some people I know who have been staunch opponents to free speech, I can think of two off the top of my head, were then Me Too'd. They were the believe all women type. And they were Me Too'd. They were falsely accused of rape. A friend of ours went to court twice and won both of those times where he was sued by women who said that and those are criminal charges. They're not civil charges. Those are criminal charges. He was found innocent, and then now he's a free speech champion. So sometimes people have to experience an injustice themselves before they'll speak out. But even in those circumstances, you have something operative in the society of, oh, there's a social norm, we can't violate the social norm, there's a cultural norm, there's a political norm. But if you don't have the disposition to speak up and fight those things, I had the disposition to speak up and fight those things, and I was out of a job. I had literally no idea what I was going to do in 2021. I had no money, I had nothing coming in, but I realized that the consequence of me not speaking up was greater than the consequence, by far, of me speaking up. Because if you do that over time, you'll lose your integrity. You know? I just want to say one more thing on that because I think it's important. So I'm almost 60, and I think I'm the oldest one in this room. Am I the oldest one in this room? You're 62. Okay. Well, I'm catching up to you. But when I was younger, and I saw someone covered in tattoos, I would think, holy shit, that person must be like super tough. Like they must be a tough guy. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years now. Last night, I was at the gym, and I saw this guy who was a brown belt, who was about 40. His entire face was covered in tattoos, like his whole face. Like that's that's another level. That's like different from, the arm tattoos or the leg tattoos. And so I went up to him, we slapped hands, and we wrestled. And he beat me, but it's that disposition, I think, that's important. Tough isn't, as my friend Matt Thornton, who wrote the book, The Gift of Violence, says, tough isn't how you act, it's how you train. It's not bravado, it's not toughness. Tough is that Greek virtue of Parrhesia. It's speaking truth in the face of danger. If you can speak truth, if you can call out the power structure or say something that you think is wrong, if you can call it an injustice, that's being tough. It's not bowing and it's not yielding. And if enough people do that, that's how the system is able to self-correct. The system has built-in mechanisms, but if you remove those mechanisms and don't allow anyone to say anything, then whatever bad idea is within the system will get stuck in the system. There's no lubricant for that. There's no way to get that machine going again to throw out bad ideas. You'll just be stuck with the bad ideas. If you come from these societies, it's very difficult when you import those norms to make changes in that society, and then you replicate what you had in the old society. But many people intentionally want to replicate what they had in the old society. So maybe the problem, the problem comes earlier, and you have to be more careful about who you let into the society. It's Popper's famous, now talked about ad nauseum, paradox of tolerance. So I think it's a complex problem.